Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Grab your seats, switch your phones to silent or to stun. We are about to begin. We are here, gathered here today, to officially mark the launch of Effective Altruism Australia. You know, in some rooms, that alone would be justification for a spontaneous round of applause. I thought as much. As Trump might say, work with me much better. So, welcome everybody. Great to see you here. My name's Brett DeHoot. I'll be your MC throughout the evening. Now, this event is already a success by my standards because I'm old showbiz and this is a sellout, folks. When I spoke to Dan, I think you'd sold about 70 tickets. You were confident you'd make it to 100, maybe 150. Beyond that, who knows? We have a waiting list. We've squeezed in extra seats, and we've got Facebook Live to beam us to the world. And there are 3, I believe, satellite events based around watching us on Facebook. Go figure for what passes as entertainment these days. And they obviously haven't heard of the Book of Mormon. And they're in, I think, Brisbane and Adelaide and Canberra, biggest thing to ever hit Adelaide. So if you're watching us via Facebook Live, a very special welcome. You know Facebook Live allows you to see us, but what you might not know is we can also see you. That's how 200 people have come together. We're perving on your browser history even as we speak. Now, this is a big deal and this is a new way to give. Last time I was in this room was to launch another community, a community foundation backed by a big bank. And it probably fell into that cliche of rich, old, white people who believed in doing good and giving back. If you're watching us via Facebook Live, I can assure you the demographics in this room are vastly different. We have a young, vibrant, hip group in the room. Are there any young, vibrant, hip people in the room? All right. Not that there is anything wrong, with being old or white or male. Are there any old white people in the room? Thank God. Rich people, good. Young or old, hip or not, we are gathered on Wurundjeri land. And I want to pay our respects to the elders of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. They have been gathering on this spot for millennia to teach and to learn and to initiate and celebrate. And in a small way, that's the tradition in which we're following tonight. So we extend our respect to elders past and present. Why wouldn't we? They're the oldest continuous living culture on planet Earth. And for those of you who are detail-orientated, I know many of you are, Wurundjeri land extends to the Mordialloc River, south, and north of the Yarra, which fascinates me, or what we now call the Yarra, which fascinates me because being from East Paran, I've actually never been north of the Yarra. But it's not as if I live in a bubble. I don't live in a bubble. Some of my friends have been north of the Yarra, and they assure me that it's a hotbed of ethnic eateries and exciting real estate investment opportunities. Is that right? And there's a tunnel that goes all the way to Castlemaine. Now, oh come on, that deserved a bigger laugh. Never mind. That probably killed on Facebook Live. So, without further ado, we've got some speakers, we've got some videos, and we do also have a chance, by the way, at the other end of all of that, for you to mix and mingle and take in the hospitality and meet each other. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I would like to introduce to the lectern the acting CEO of Effective Altruism Australia, Michael Deliakovo. Make him welcome.
Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to the launch of Effective Altruism Australia. On behalf of our entire team, I'd like to thank you all for coming to what promises to be an incredible evening. I would like to acknowledge the tremendous generosity of the Hilton South Wharf for hosting our event this evening, and also along with our corporate sponsors, Uber Eats, for their support of the launch. To those who weren't able to join us at the Hilton tonight but are watching via our live Facebook stream, we thank you for your continued support. Effective Altruism Australia exists to alleviate poverty and suffering. Our aim is to empower everyday Australians to have their donations have the highest impact possible. We do this by supporting charities consistently ranked as highly cost-effective by independent charity evaluators, such as GiveWell and The Life You Can Save. These charities are transparent, committed to evaluation, and focused on scaling of proven interventions. They've done their research, and they're transforming lives every day. Since we began operations in March of 2016, we've raised over $660,000 for highly effective poverty and global health charities. This figure represents a real, tangible difference to the lives of those in need. Thanks to the incredible generosity of hundreds of donors, many of whom are now in the audience with us tonight, this has resulted in the distribution of almost 8,000 anti-malarial bed nets, the deworming of 238,647 children, and over $290,000 given in cash grants. Thank you, everyone, for this, helping us make this amazing impact. We founded Effective Altruism Australia out of a need to see our donations go further. In a world struggling with so many challenges, it's imperative that we aim to achieve the most that we can with the limited time and resources that we have. While each of us shares the vision of a global community unburdened by poverty and suffering, the nature of change is incremental, and we can't fix everything at once. Effective Altruism aims to effect as much of this change as we can, using evidence and reason, to make the world a better place in the most impactful way possible. We've come a long way in our first year of operations, but there is still much work to be done. Effective Altruism Australia will continue to support evidence-backed charities and stand as a voice of reason and balanced information that Australians can trust. Our aim is to motivate both individual donors and existing charities to be as effective as possible and to do the most good that they can. Tonight you'll see some inspiring Australians doing meaningful work in a wide range of fields, and we hope you'll learn not only from their stories, but also from the experiences of those sitting around you. We want to inspire you and encourage you to think big, and to use this evening as a springboard for action. We hope that whatever your chosen cause, you will seek to combine evidence and reason to have as much impact as possible. Before I hand back over to our charismatic MC, Brett DeHoot, for the rest of the evening, I'd like to thank our launch director, Daniel de Hotman, and his team for their effort and dedication over the last 8 months. I also want to thank the entire Effective Altruism Australia team, many of whom are in the audience with us tonight. None of this would have been possible without you. Thank you, and enjoy the evening.
As acting CEO, Michael is responsible for basically making things as economically effective as possible for the organisation, and they got this venue for naught, for cost. They got me for naught or cost. I asked him to validate my parking. He spat in my face. He's hardcore! One thing I like about this lineup today is it could be awfully worthy, couldn't it? Be honest, with some of you walking in thinking Friday night could be doing a lot of things. You know, there's probably episodes of Midsummer Murders on ABC for the older people. Those of you younger would be streaming. And thinking this could be a little worthy, a little bit dry. Actually, you're probably going to leave inspired. And we probably need inspiration at this point in our lives more than ever, I dare say. It's been a rather depressing period. You're going to meet some people who have made stuff happen and have already created a legacy. Often, they didn't take very much of their life to do that. They make me sick. So, they're all thin, they're all good looking, they're all polite, they're all, oh my God. Okay. Ryan Carters joins us. Ryan's a cricketer, a professional cricketer. You probably didn't expect to hear from a professional cricketer at an event such as this. Plays for the Sydney Sixers and the New South Wales Blues. But he's a jock with a heart of gold, like those prostitutes in those movies. So, he's also a rather thinking person. In fact, you weren't quite sure if you'd made the right life choices that led you to being a professional cricketer when you set off on a little journey with a couple of mates from Mongolia to Russia via canoe. Sounds like a start of a joke, doesn't it, really? But when you came back, you started an initiative that you're going to share with us, Batting for Change. And it is just reassuring that people from literally all walks of life, all career choices, all backgrounds, whether they've studied it formally or not, can turn the powers they have for good, not evil. Before I introduce Ryan to the stage, I think we should see a little video to set the scene, perhaps, which is my first technical challenge for the evening. Usually, folks, I have people for that. that Michael spat in my face when I asked for one. I've got a running gag on you now, Michael. All right. Behold.
$1 a day. That's all many families in India have to live on. That's $1 for food, water, shelter, everything. One of the toughest hits to take? No chance at a real education.
But it doesn't take a fortune to change a fortune.
Education is the best way to lift a family out of poverty.
This is especially powerful for girls.
And that's why this summer,
I'm batting for change.
I'm batting for change.
I'm batting for change.
every six the Sydney Sixers hit during the Big Bash.
We'll raise funds for the LBW Trust to sponsor tertiary education for young women in India and Sri Lanka, where they love their cricket too, but don't have the same opportunities in life. Every six I hit helps someone learn.
Every six I hit could change a woman's life. But we can't do it without you.
Get behind Batting for Change and make a pledge for every six we hit this summer.
Your small change can change your life.
Visit battingforchange.com.au to make your pledge today.
Just waiting for the slides, okay, there we go. Before I start, people up the back, can you hear me okay? Good volume, all right, that's key. Many children around the world grow up in conditions of hardship and poverty, but I wasn't one of them. This is a photo of me on my 3rd birthday, getting on quite nicely at my family home in London. My personality was already emerging. First observation, sandals and socks, stripes on stripes, and Harry high pants. My mother was a clear example of an ineffective altruist. Second observation, my brand new yellow cricket bat. I got it that morning for my 3rd birthday. I never wanted to let this thing out of my hands. "You'll never get me out!" I yelled at the bowler. Surprisingly, it was true. You see, the bowler was my aging gran. She hobbled to the crease and delivered a slow underarm. And I smashed her all over the garden. Look at that smug little smile. I'm surprised I wasn't licking my lips. All through my childhood, my dream was to play cricket for Australia. I used to play cricket every chance I got at home, in the backyard with my brother Sam, in the front yard, in the hallway, beneath the clothesline, and even in the shower. Yep, we used to play cricket in the shower. My hometown of Canberra was in severe drought at the time, so we had compulsory water restrictions. Mum always wanted us out of the shower, but I said, "Those shower ashes aren't going to win themselves, Mum," and proceeded to hit that soap to all parts of the shower. I soon graduated from the Carter's shower to the nets at my high school, and from there I was lucky enough to get a professional cricket contract with the Victorian Bushrangers. So I moved down to Melbourne and became a full-time cricketer alongside my university studies. I loved my first year playing for Victoria. I got to train and play alongside what had been my childhood idols. It was like everything I needed to improve was right there at my fingertips. I could feel myself getting better every day. But a strange thing happened over the next few years. I began to notice that I wasn't happy or satisfied. I was living out my childhood dream, but I wasn't a child anymore. I felt the pressure of professional sport. It's a privileged profession, but it's also quite intense. Everything you do comes with a number next to your name. Every match you get a personal score, and at training you're measured in every possible way. If your numbers are good, you are celebrated, and if your numbers are bad, you get sacked. It doesn't matter if you're a kind, friendly person or just an arrogant twat. Anyway, I'm sure this is familiar to you. The pattern is replicated in many parts of our society. The pressure makes you feel sick and anxious. You feel sometimes like a small cog in this ruthless competitive machine. It's not necessarily your boss or your manager's fault. It's just the way our society is set up, and I think it does a lot of bad as well as some good. Around this time, I became increasingly interested in the bigger picture: philosophy, economics, and global inequality. Travelling with cricket through countries like India and South Africa, I met many people finding their way through hardship and poverty. I saw that the world is a fundamentally unjust place. So much comes down to the lottery of birth. I didn't know how to respond to this rigged lottery. One of the authors I came across was Peter Singer, who I'm lucky enough to be sharing the stage with tonight. And one particular thought experiment of his really stuck with me. If a child was drowning in a pond, but you were wearing your new pair of $200 sneakers, would you ruin your sneakers in order to save that child? Of course, the answer is yes. But if you could save a child's life in Bangladesh with $200, should you donate the money or buy a new pair of sneakers? Meanwhile, the locker room chat about how to spend your money consisted mostly of golf, the horses, and the pub. I craved something deeper: truer friendships, better conversation, and a more meaningful contribution to the world. What does a silly game of cricket matter when 100 million young people in South Asia alone are surviving on less than $1 per day? Are sports people any more than pin-up boards for gambling, alcohol, and fast food advertisements? Instead of working on solutions, was I actually contributing to the problem? But I was still highly aware of how fortunate I was to be playing sport for a living. Yeah, cricket still meant a lot to me. But I seemed to have kept all the anxiety and pressure and lost the passion and sense of purpose. It seemed that I had a decision to make. I think many people feel something like this at some point of their lives, right? You feel like you either have to resign yourself to your problems or burn everything down, run away dramatically. Or, as I like to call it, bury your head in the sand or go full Chris McCandless. One of my favourite films is called Into the Wild. It's the true story of Chris McCandless, a young man who leaves his regular life behind in search of something more real. He leaves his friends and family, donates his savings to charity, hopefully an effective one, drives into the desert, buries his license, burns his cash, and then wanders homeless around America. Chris finds so much beauty and strength in his wanderings and meets some extraordinary people. At this point in the film, I'm ready to bury my cricket bat, burn my KFC jersey, and join him. But Chris pushes further and further away from society until ultimately he starves to death alone in the Alaskan wilderness. A move to New South Wales seemed like a better option. So I took up a contract and decided to give cricket one more year. On my way from Melbourne to Sydney, I took a small detour to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. It's funny where cheap fares land you sometimes. I was joining a canoeing expedition with two of my oldest friends. We canoed across Mongolia, from Lake Hovsgol up in the northwest, all the way to Siberia on the Russian border in the northeast. We carried with us clothes, books, 2 barrels of food, and a 3-man tent. Our days in the canoe unfolded simply and slowly, surrounded by the peaceful Mongolian steppe country. Each night we would choose a spot to camp, cook dinner on the fire, and sit around reading and chatting. This month away from society and obligation really gave me space to reflect. I felt fearless and free, thousands of miles away from any normal pressure or responsibility. Maybe there was a middle option between do nothing or go full Chris McCandless. Maybe I could find a new form of meaning. We paddled down the river with full hearts and clear minds. I felt incredibly calm and yet full of energy. How do I keep this feeling when I get home? I asked. It made me think a lot about fear of failure. Often in life, the thing that holds us back is the fear that we will fail and that people will judge us in some way for it. I believe this cripples us more than we know. I've often heard the saying, "What would you try if you knew you could not fail?" But maybe we instead need to ask, what is worth trying regardless of the outcome? What if the process of trying matters more than the outcome? And what if success exists right here in the moment of decision? What if not trying is failing? And what would happen if we actually took these ideas seriously? I came home from Mongolia determined to be different. I wanted to make an impact to help young people whose upbringing was much more difficult than mine. I thought about the things I was grateful for and that not everyone has the chance at. I thought about the people I had met on my cricketing travels, and I thought about the things I had learned at university in economics and development studies. My mind came firmly to education. It's so much more than a certificate. The opportunity to quality education transforms people's lives. It leads to self-confidence, empowerment, and autonomy. It can break the cycle of poverty in one generation. For young women especially, traditionally excluded in many cultures, education is essential for a fair chance in life. Educated women tend to marry later and have fewer children, but those children that they do have tend to be healthier and more educated, and so the benefits spread throughout the community in the next generation. So I came up with an idea. It's called Batting for Change. Partnering with the LBW Trust charity, it's an initiative to bring together cricket-loving Australians to support the education of disadvantaged young people in the cricket-playing world. We aim to transform communities by empowering young people, predominantly women, with the opportunity at a high-quality education. As you saw in the video, each summer we invite people to log on to battingforchange.com.au and pledge a small amount of money for every six hit by my team, the Sydney Sixers, in the T20 Big Bash League. I hope that this pledge per six model would provide a fun way for people to make a difference, but I didn't know if anyone would support it. I figured the point was to give it a try and that I had very little to lose. In the first season of Batting for Change, we raised enough money to support the construction of a new tertiary wing at the Heartland College in Nepal. I was amazed by the generosity of family, friends, and complete strangers. In the last 3 years, we've raised over $500,000, and we currently support the tertiary education of over 1,000 women who have grown up in poverty in Mumbai and rural Sri Lanka. As well as our Big Bash Pledge Per Six campaign, we play fundraising matches in schools across Sydney. Communities come together to support a more level playing field in global education. The young girl in this photo on the bottom right is Rabina Ansari. I first met Rabina when I visited her college in Mumbai in 2015. Rabina is one of 6 children. Her father passed away when she was young. Rabina loved going to school, but her family had no money to support her further education. Thanks to Batting for Change funding, she's able to study for her Bachelor of Arts, and her dream is to one day become a lecturer in economics. A surprising thing that happened that summer when I founded Batting for Change. I started playing really good cricket. It was my best season ever, and I was named Player of the Year in the New South Wales team that won the Sheffield Shield. I felt renewed purpose, wonderful presence, and far less pressure than before. My cricket had taken on a new dimension, and I felt happy and fulfilled. While living in Victoria, I changed in such a way that I became distant and alienated from my own life. When I changed my attitude to fear and strived to change the lives of others, I changed myself more than I realised. I became freer, lighter, and more present. Young women like Rabina have found new opportunities for their future, and myself and others who have joined Batting for Change have found this new perspective on the present. But here's the thing about change. It keeps changing. It's unfortunate that success can sometimes lead us to become more conservative rather than braver. We grow pleased with our numbers, with our outcomes and comparisons, and so we can grow anxious to preserve them. We forget that what matters is the trying and the evolution that it brings. I believe that utilitarian ethics and effective altruism are a powerful combination for good. It's essential that our attempts to make a difference are both intelligent and effective. At the same time, it's also important to also remember the humanity of the people on both sides of the interaction. Humans are complex and often contradictory creatures. Let's keep in mind that human flourishing is a process of becoming. It's not an endpoint of a journey or something you can put into an equation. We should respect the complexity of distant others, but also the complexity within ourselves. To help other people flourish, we need to investigate what human flourishing might look and feel like, and our best hope of that is to remain open, curious, and alive to the world, and to embrace uncertainty. It's now 3 years since I founded Batting for Change, and we're still changing all the time. I still feel confused by the big questions in the world, and how I should be during my short time here. The path ahead is sometimes clear, but sometimes foggy. One thing I do know is that I'm extremely lucky to have had this start in life, and that every young person deserves a quality education. And one privilege of education is the opportunity to ask questions. So I invite you to ask yourselves, where could you be a little bit braver? What conversations are missing from your life? And what's worth trying, regardless of the outcome? Thank you.
I just lost that message, I think, if that was for me. Isn't it refreshing to hear a professional Australian sports person not get up on microphone and say you're taking it one match at a time? That was thoughtful, and may your thinking infect all of your brothers and sisters across all of the sports at all of the levels, because that's the sort of approach to giving, and I dare say to life, heaven forbid, that we need. Absolutely marvellous. Once again, Ryan, thank you so much. Now, we've got a few short videos to break up our speakers. Now, effective altruism has really made some entire organisations possible and bigger and more effective, of course, than ever. And we're going to meet one of them via a short video from Professor Alan Fenwick, who joins us from Britain. He is the founder of SCI, Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. And if you thought that just fell off my tongue, think again. That's pretty much been my afternoon. Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. There will be a pop test at the end of the event tonight. Let's meet the professor.
Hello from London to the effective altruists in Australia. My name is Alan Fenwick. I'm a professor of tropical parasitology at Imperial College in London, but also the founder of the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, SCI, which has been supported by the effective altruists all over the world, but particularly in Australia in the recent past. I'm here to congratulate you all on the launching of effective altruism officially in Australia. It's a fantastic movement and one that I'm very, very pleased to be involved with. SCI has been running now for 14 years, and our mission is actually to provide free treatment for a number of parasitic diseases, particularly...
Anyone like to guess? No. Remain calm. Everything is under control. Don't go anywhere. But don't tweet this out. Sam Biddle, paging Sam Biddle. Have we lost the professor? Was he live and that's why we've lost him? Fine, Sam. There are some trainee doctors here. I think we'll fare well, the professor. But he was talking about the incredible. I have had the privilege of watching that entire video for the full 90 seconds. And he talks with great gratitude about the impact of effective altruism on his entire organisation. And we'll meet actually another real live human being who does something not dissimilar. So I'm going to forward from this. Okay. Now, folks, Ryan mentioned about thinking about the world that you wish to create, the difference you would make, what you would do if you weren't so damn fearful. What better way to consider such issues than to lock yourself in a tank, all by yourself, in a pool of water, and float? I'm not just making this up, and this is one hell of a segue. I should be paid extra. Because Rest House Float Centre have come on board to support Effective Altruism Australia. It's a natural fit, of course. And they have supplied all of you. Have you received it? Is it on your chair? Have we distributed it, Alistair? Well, you are going to receive a voucher for a free float at the Rest House Float Centre, where you can lock yourself away from the trials and tribulations of everyday life, lie in the dark in a pool of water, and return essentially to the womb, where you will consider the world you wish to create through altruism or any other endeavour. This is remarkable, Alistair. I don't know how you negotiated that. Was that you? Incredible who you meet on Instagram, or was it Snapchat, or something less salubrious? So we thank the Rest House Float Centre in Hampton for their generosity, who are proud to offer a $75 experience for a free float. What an opportunity to think. I think that sounds lovely. Now, folks, pop quiz. It's an awfully crowded marketplace for charities in Australia. But have you heard of this one, Fred Hollows Foundation? Is there anyone in this room who has not heard of the Fred Hollows Foundation? Anybody? Anybody? What do they do, folks? Just shout it out. Eye surgery. That brand recognition is worth gold. And about approximately how much might it cost for one sort of cataract operation in a developing world country? How much approximately? 25. How the hell do you know that, sir? What are you, some sort of auditor? That's the sort of recognition that Fred Hollows enjoys, far beyond the normal lifespan of a charity. And that sort of understanding a specific amount for a specific act that we see as doing specific good has possibly been the secret of its success, I dare say. And they are a phenomenal fundraising and eye-operating machine. And by the way, actually, I think there are some costs beyond just the cataract surgery. The cost to sponsor an eye surgeon's training or an eye doctor's training comes to $88 a month. Are there any medical students in the room? How would you like your training to cost $88 a month? Perhaps you should move to a developing world country. Now, one woman who can talk to us about Fred Hollows and her take on effective altruism joins us now. Kirsten Armstrong, who is the Director of Knowledge and Innovation at the Fred Hollows Foundation. Please make her very welcome.
Ryan, fantastic presentation. I still hate cricket, but like now I feel I have to engage with it. Oh my goodness me, fantastic work. Despite the fact that I feel like cricket isn't the thing that brings us together, we do have a few things in common. We've both spent a lot of time, thank you, we've both spent a lot of time in Sydney, so apologies to everyone for being from Sydney. Also apologies for being an Essendon supporter. Come on the Bombers. The second thing we've got in common is Mongolia, so I've also spent quite some time there doing something completely different. I was advising the government on a compulsory third-party motor insurance scheme. So a little bit less sexy than kayaking, canoeing down a river, but nevertheless, I did talk about how fabulous the TAC is and the work they do. The third thing we have in common, we both had one of those do nothing or burn everything down moments. And I suspect there's a few people that are sitting in this front row that have had that moment. My moment, a few of you, if you look outside, you'll see this little sort of pink and peachy coloured logo called PwC. I used to be a partner at PwC some time ago, and my do nothing burn the house down moment was the decision to leave that role and come into the not-for-profit sector, and I'm very, very happy with that decision and haven't looked back. So my talk today is going to be a little less personal, I think, than yours. It's going to be a bit of a journey about the Fred Hollows Foundation and how we're trying to embed the principles of effective altruism, you know, making decisions, using all the evidence to make the right decisions into our work. But reflecting what you were saying about you need to try something new, sometimes that evidence and information isn't there, and how as an organisation can we make sure that we're staying true and trying new things but still trying to seek the evidence for that. And as a Director of Knowledge and Innovation at the Foundation, you can see we're trying to put those two things together, the evidence and impact with the new ideas, and really trying to push ourselves to do more, to do new things, but actually still make sure we've got the evidence to justify that. But thank you for your speech, I really enjoyed it. I was lucky enough last year to speak at the EAG, the conference that was held last year by the Effective Altruism community, so that was fantastic, and I was overwhelmed by the combined intellect in the room. So my speech is a little bit techie, but I'll try to keep it a little bit light because it's Friday night. So I think we've all worked out that we all know who Fred Hollows is and who what the Fred Hollows Foundation does. A world where no one is needlessly blind and Indigenous Australians enjoy the same health as other Australians. The Foundation's been going for 25 years now, so it was almost 25 years ago that our founder, Fred Hollows, passed away, but we still live his vision and are true to his legacy of just getting stuff done and really, every eye is an eye, regardless of who you are. The Foundation, I won't go through all the numbers, but we have had the opportunity, at least in the last decade, to restore sight to at least 2 million people. And in the last year alone, we've touched 20 million lives with preventative treatments for trachoma. So we're big and we're trying to do our best to have a global impact. Blindness, 32 million people in the world are blind. 4 out of 5 of those don't need to be. They have preventable or avoidable blindness that can be treated. And half of those are blind due to cataracts. So, 16 million people in the world have cataracts and are blind due to cataracts. A 20-minute operation, how much was it? $25? Simple message. An operation can cost as little as $25 to restore sight. So it is a core focus of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do. So this little slide shows our global results from 2015. I'm sorry that I can't present our 2016 results just yet. There are some I's being dotted and some T's being crossed as we speak. But what I can say is that through the work of the Fred Hollows Foundation and our partners on the ground, there's been over 1 million operations and treatments in 2016, and over 20 million people in Ethiopia alone have received preventative treatment for trachoma. So, but what I wanted to talk to you about this is not about all the big numbers that we might have done, but actually about how we're starting to rethink the way we talk about our work. So what this slide shows is that we're working in lots and lots of different countries and that we're doing lots and lots of different things. 1 million eye operations, 8 million people treated with antibiotics, and so on and so on. And significant number of doctors and other health workers trained. What it doesn't tell you is what I think an organisation like ours needs to be telling you. And this is what we're working toward. So what we need to be telling you as effective altruists is what the impact is that we've had on blindness, because that's our mission, is to end avoidable blindness. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is the challenges that we face as an organisation that does quite a diverse range of things to actually end blindness, and how we're trying to actually address those challenges. And I am very hopeful that I'll get the opportunity to draw on some of the combined wisdoms of people here and in the community to actually help us to improve our work. So I mentioned PwC before. The do nothing, burn everything down moment actually came when I was at PwC and doing some work for the Fred Hollows Foundation. So I started some work with them where we were actually doing a traditional, dare I say, cost-benefit analysis to understand what the costs and benefits were of trying to end avoidable blindness. And of course, that study found that for every dollar invested in ending avoidable blindness in developing countries, there was at least a $4 return. So, clear that it was a good economic solution. What it also found, and possibly something that the Fred Hollows Foundation and the eye health community hadn't really envisaged, was actually it was going to cost a lot of money. So the tiny little bit on the side, it's a little bit difficult to see, but basically our estimates was that over a 10-year period, if we end avoidable blindness over 10 years, it was going to in developing countries, it was going to cost about $400 billion. And we kind of thought, where exactly is that going to come from? So it made it clear to me that, and to the foundation and to others in the eye health community, that simply relying on grant funding and donations alone was not going to be the only solution to this. And simply doing surgeries ourselves or spending money on our partners doing surgeries or just doing training people and so on, this wasn't enough. We had to think bigger picture about making systemic changes that were actually long-term and sustainable. So this was a real sort of catalyst in launching a new strategic plan for the Fred Hollows Foundation. Staying true to our core values, focusing on ending avoidable blindness, but trying to actually be more creative in the way that we did that. And I know this is not something that's easy to read and you're not really meant to read the detail, but what I'll do is just focus on the little line of white boxes across the top, which is our long-term goals. And there were 5 of those goals that we identified. The first 3 are about 3 different types of diseases. So cataract, again, cataract being half of avoidable blindness, it absolutely fundamentally remains a key focus for the Fred Hollows Foundation. Trachoma is eliminated. The reason trachoma is in there is actually it is feasible. If we'd seen the schistoma, I need you to say it for me.
Oh no, that's gone now.
Damn it. If you'd seen the schisto story, if you'd seen the schisto story, you would have seen that too can be eliminated. But it is actually feasible. It's an infectious condition. It is actually feasible globally that it could be eliminated within 5 to 10 years. So that's an exciting opportunity, and we're definitely a key player in that. And the third kind of disease area is diabetic retinopathy. So not a lot of people realise that diabetes is a cause of blindness. Most people with diabetes now live in low-income countries, not in wealthy countries, and it is the single biggest cause of blindness in working-age populations. So there are our 3 sort of focus areas as an organisation, and that's the reasons why. And the last 2 buckets are more about how we get there. So building sustainable health systems and making sure that those sustainable health systems are appropriately financed. So drawing on local resources where we can, government resources in the countries that we work to support the system in the long term. So that might sound a little bit different perhaps to what people think of as the Fred Hollows Foundation. So, flying people out and doing surgeries or flying people out who train other people to do surgeries. That's still a core part of our work, but we're actually augmenting that with a whole bunch of other ways to ensure that we're not going to have to be there forever. We're not going to have to be flying the people in, but actually we've built the local institutions, the local training institutions that will train their own doctors so that ultimately we're not necessary. So that is our focus going forward. The other thing that we focused on is actually global partnerships and advocacy. So we realised that eye health isn't just about the eye doctors going out and doing surgery. The example of diabetes is a good one, and I'll talk about that one just sort of hiding in the corner there. The International Diabetes Federation is a good example of the sort of partnerships we're working through to advocate for real change around eye health. So people with diabetes, as I mentioned before, people with diabetes can go blind. It's critical that they have an eye check every year. The best people to encourage a person with diabetes to get that eye check is not an eye doctor. They're not seeing an eye doctor every year. They're seeing a GP, a health professional. They're seeing a diabetologist, an endocrinologist. I got all those words out. So, so they're the people that we need to influence for change. So we're doing that through organisations like the International Diabetes Federation. So the challenge for me, working in part of the organisation where we're talking about our impact and how we've made change and how many lives we've influenced and how much blindness we've avoided. It's really quite difficult when you're starting to delve into somewhat more complex things, but as you said, we've got to keep trying. We know that these are the right things to be doing, and we have to keep trying. So how do our systems and processes, for measuring and showing the impact of what we do, catch up? So real challenges: how do we measure the impact of strengthening a health system? What if we want to improve good quality data so they're managing their system better? Can we show that it's become more efficient? It's 20% more efficient, we're getting more surgeries. How do we measure the impact of working with the International Diabetes Federation around things like advocacy and partnerships? How do we measure the impact of a sustainable system? Sure, we've trained a lot of doctors and we can see the surgeries that they've done. What if we're building a training institution that goes on and trains its own doctors into the future? So these are the sorts of things that we're trying to work through at the moment. What is a fair attribution? I know that's always something that people get stuck on. One of the examples I've sort of given to have that discussion about is around IOL factories. So an IOL is the little lens that goes into your eye. If you have cataract surgery, and by the way, 80% of people in the room are going to have cataract surgery at some time in your life. Just letting you know, get your eyes checked, don't worry. The IOL that goes into your eye, the little lens that go into your eye when you do that, they used to cost around $500. And one of the first things that Fred Hollows did when the foundation was launched was actually build IOL factories in low resource countries like Nepal and Eritrea. And those factories brought the cost down from $500 to $5. So how do we show the impact that that's had on accessibility and blindness? So those sorts of catalytic change is really important to the way that we work. But how do we show our role in that? And then there's the practical challenges, and I've put up this example, the Pakistan example, where it's just been tough for us to actually show the impact of what we've done. We started working there in 1998, and between 98 and 2007, the rate of avoidable blindness, the percentage of people in that country who were blind, it halved. So there was ourselves and two other large eye health organisations working very closely with partners on the ground as well as the government to really do a big drive around this. So, we could demonstrate a really great impact over that time. There was another, prevalent study done to show the change that had happened. But since then, Pakistan's been a very unstable country, very difficult to work in. Since 2007, they haven't even had a census, let alone a study of blindness. So how can we actually show the impact of what we've done over that time? So it just creates challenges, real practical challenges in the places that we work. We try to deal with them, but, it's sort of understanding that we can only demonstrate the evidence where we can. So a couple of solutions that we're working on. One of them is we're trying to work with the whole eye health sector and other parts to actually come up with a standard set of measures that we all use as a sector. Secondly, we're trying to develop what I call a blindness impact calculator. So if we invest money in training a doctor or building a training institutions, that we actually can talk about, the impact, what we estimate will be the impact on avoidable blindness of what we do. And there's two reasons I think that's important. One is it's about telling our story, but the other thing is for us to make the right decisions on where we're going to invest our money going forward. And the last thing is developing an index for the bits that we probably just aren't going to be able to really measure. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the things I talked about before was health system strengthening, so building the quality of the health system so that it's more functional, more resilient, able to train its own people and so on. So we're looking at building an index, and I will flip forward to this one. Just an example from another sector where they've, I think, had more success. They're sort of using indices to talk about progress. So we're looking at building and this is a women's resilience index, and who would have thought you could actually, put some numbers around something as complex as women's resilience. So we're looking at sort of building what I would call an eye health system resilience index, I suppose, or sustainability index, so that we can actually track progress ourselves on strengthening the systems that we work in. So I'm going to stop there and thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all for being part of the Effective Altruism community. We are on a journey in terms of how we're able to demonstrate, measure and use data on our impact every day, and I hope we get the opportunity to draw on some of the combined wisdom of people in the Effective Altruism community to improve what we do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Schistosomiasis. Is it a little late? Sorry, my sense of timing's not great sometimes. By the way, folks, if you're a Twitterer, who are the Twitterers in the room? Hands up. If you don't know what Twitter is, boy, you're way, way, way behind. We've all become really rich via Twitter. And we're using a hashtag tonight that can sort of unite you all in the Twitter sphere. Hashtag EAA launch. Hashtag EAA launch. We would love to hear your thoughts, please. Now, when I'm not showing off on stage, I'm a comms and marketing consultant to the non-profit sector, and I've been doing that for 18 years, and that's about 800 plus clients. And I have seen a broad range of clients in terms of effectiveness, in terms of the value they bring. And I can't pretend otherwise. Some organisations, some programs are really the human equivalent of Rube Goldberg machines. Does that ring a bell? Anyone not know what a Rube Goldberg is? Of course. Rube Goldberg was a real man, and he was very clever in terms of engineering and mechanicals. And he had a little habit of creating machines that were extravagant, deliberately ludicrously extravagant, with pulleys and buckets of water that would fill and then get heavy and then make some dominoes fall over and then make some pulleys work. And do you get the drift? Big, extravagant, delicate, fragile mechanical devices. And the conceit was, the humour was that they would all do something extremely simple. Boil an egg, pull the cork out of a bottle of wine, make toast. So the joke was for Rube, because he was a funster, this big extravagant machine takes minutes and time, and it's confusing and susceptible to breaking down, and it doesn't do that much anyway. But that's fun to watch. And if you go on YouTube, Google them, they are fantastic. However, I have seen some organisations which are pretty much awfully Rube Goldberg-esque. And that's why I love really simple solutions, and I think that's what Effective Altruism Australia is all about, really simple solutions. One woman who knows how much you can do with a tablet that costs about 80 cents joins us now. Grace Hollister, who has a delightful title. You work for Evidence Action, and you are the director of the De-Worm the World program. I never thought I'd meet a girl with that title, but I have now. Ladies and gentlemen, please make Grace very welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, so my title actually is Director of the De-Worm the World initiative. Some people love it. Some people get a little squeamish sometimes, but I'm very used to talking about worms on a regular basis now, so it doesn't bother me too much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here representing Evidence Action at the Effective Altruism Australia launch. Evidence Action is actually a US-based organization, but I happen to be lucky enough to live here in Melbourne, and so also equally lucky to join you here tonight. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the work that we do, and then we have a little video of about the work that De-Worm the World does to show as well. So first, a little bit about worms. I actually left out the scientific names from my presentation, but I'm happy to talk to you about it later if it's of interest to anybody. So just a little bit about worms. Parasitic worms are something that most of us in this room are lucky enough to never have to encounter in life, although some people do happen to pick them up on their travels in developing countries from time to time. At the moment, about 840 million children globally are at risk for parasitic worm infection. These infections are endemic in areas and countries with poor sanitation and hygiene conditions. This is one of the things that also perpetuates their reinfection. They're transmitted through soil and through water. And they contribute to anemia and malnutrition. And so they're particularly important for children who are at that sensitive time in their development, and it's really important to reach them at that point in time. So at the current time, an estimated 350 million children that are at risk remain untreated. That's actually a number that has gone down substantially in the last few years, which we're all very excited about in the community, but you'll get to see a little bit more of those numbers in a bit. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and some of the people in this room may have heard about this, I actually spoke at the EAA conference last year in Melbourne, and there was a little bit of some questioning about some of whether the evidence is robust. And obviously this community is a really important community to talk about evidence with, and it's something that, as you would think from the name Evidence Action, that we're really concerned about as well. And that is this something that is worth doing? Is deworming important? And so I just wanted to make a few points about why we continue to think it is. One is that, and I'm trying not to get too scientific on you, but do worms cause morbidity? One thing that I just want to be clear about is that treatment is the clinical standard of care. Anybody who in this room who got a worm infection, you'd go to your doctor, you'd take a pill, you wouldn't have worms anymore. And that's what we're trying to do for people, and particularly children all over the world who don't have the luxury of regular health care. Are drugs efficacious and safe? Yes, they are. They're low cost. They're safe, even for those who are uninfected. This is just a simple pill that you have to give once a year. And large-scale delivery, is that the most cost-effective strategy? In fact, it is. It's really the only way to reach children cost-effectively where they are, and that's because it's cheaper to do it that way, and it's more operationally feasible to make sure that kids receive treatment. As I said, not everybody has the luxury of being able to go even to a health clinic. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we do specifically to make sure that kids get dewormed. But the other thing to say is that there's a lot of research around why deworming is important, why it works, and the impact that it has on school attendance, on cognition, on child weight, on long-term productivity and earnings. And for anybody who's interested in more details about this, I won't go into it, but be happy to talk to you later. So how do we do this? How do we get to those 840 million children who are at risk of worm infections? Well, we do it through schools. We use the existing infrastructure where children already are in most cases. In many of the countries where we work, there's more schools than health facilities. Drugs are easily available and they're safe for teachers to administer, which is really important. Because there are more schools and health facilities, there's also a lot more teachers out there than there are health workers. And this model allows for rapid scale up that is highly cost effective. And so at less than 50 cents per child per year, that's all in delivery, cost of drugs, everything, we can make sure that a child is treated. So I'm not sure why Fred Hollows is showing up on my slide. Not that I mind too much, but it's somehow carried over. Anyway, so there was a nice picture here, but it appears to have evaporated. Anyway, so what do? We enable governments to eliminate intestinal worms as a public health problem by doing these things. And what we do is we work through governments. We're not an implementing agency. So we provide tailored technical support for large-scale government-led school-based deworming programs, and we rigorously evaluate and learn from these programs to iterate as we go, with working in partnership with governments with the goal of maximizing reach, that's the number of kids who get treated, in the most cost-effective way. So these are some numbers about our scale up in recent years, which has been pretty incredible. Those big pink bars stand for India, where I was just there last week to take part in the 3rd National Deworming Day. They were targeting 340 million children to be treated. We'll see what the numbers come in like, but they treated about 189 million children in February of last year. So that's, for us, is a really big accomplishment. We also work in these other countries, and so this is our global footprint currently. We're working in India, as I said, with the national government and state governments there. We've just started to do some mapping and survey work in Pakistan to really understand which kids need to be treated. We support programs in Ethiopia with Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, who you heard from Alan earlier. We work in Nigeria now, starting to scale up treatment. We are partnering in Kenya, where we've worked for almost 5 years now, regularly helping to treat over 6 million children a year. And in Vietnam, we have a bit of a smaller scale program, but that's looking to do deworming in combination with some other interventions and trying to do some research to understand what else we can be doing around the deworming package to make this intervention even more impactful. So I think I have a video, but that's not it. Back up here. There you go.
Parasitic worms continue to be a big problem in many parts of the world. The Deworm the World initiative, led by Evidence Action, takes on the challenge of parasitic worms that infect hundreds of millions of children all over the world. Children ingest these worms when they bathe in river water, eat contaminated food, or even just run around barefoot. The World Health Organization recommends 1 dose once or twice a year in areas where there's high risk of worm infection. We partner with governments to support the treatment of millions of children in schools where they already are every day. The case for school-based deworming rests on a body of rigorous randomized controlled trials that show that deworming can improve life outcomes for people from the very early years of life right up to adulthood. This is a powerful yet achievable approach for children to have better life outcomes.
So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a taste. I'm happy to, as I said, happy to answer questions later. And thank you again for all of the support that the effective altruism community has provided to Evidence Action. We're very thankful, and it really has made a huge difference in our ability to scale up and to have the tremendous reach that we've been able to so far. So thanks again.
From Evidence Action, Director of the Deworm the World program, Grace Hollister. Thank you, Grace. Now, folks, you've been seated for a little while. Can I suggest we take literally 30 seconds to roll the shoulders, take some deep breaths, and reset, because we've got more speakers for you. 30 seconds.
Fantastic.
Where's Peter?
Where's he? He's the next speaker.
Oh, pleasure. Oh, he's next. Oh, just 15 seconds, folks. Just 15 seconds. This is for you, just here. This is for you. Grab your seats, folks. If you're on Twitter, use that hashtag EAA-launch. Now, Grace, you were the last person to shake my hand. Please don't take any offense. I'm going to sanitize now. And if you notice, I'm using I'm a bit of a hand sanitizer. I work from home alone and I still find myself sanitizing from my own germs numerous times a day. And I walk down to the bathroom and I use Thank You liquid soap. Are we all familiar with the Thank You brand of liquid soap, hand cleanser? They've branched into nappies and moisturiser and they're available everywhere and we love them because the design looks like it's Aesop but it gives us the moral high ground. And I love it. That's the secret to its success. Also probably the philanthropic thing where 100% of profits, I'll repeat that number, 100% of profits are donated to charities. Some $4.6 million and counting, probably once again spontaneous applause worthy, I would say. I mean, you've got to wonder, if you can buy something, and they are lovely products, you know, and they look lovely, and they work lovely, and they do lovely, why would you buy anything else? I'm sure that's a question you and your colleagues ask all the time, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about Thank You's approach to doing business and doing well, Pete Yao, who is the Chief Impact Officer at Thank You. Please make him very welcome.
Thanks, guys. Just on a random side note, the story before about worms and parasites, this is probably not really kosher to say this in front of everyone, but I thought, you know what, it's a great segue. Part of my role actually is looking at the funding effectiveness of our grant-making team. And part of that role involves me visiting a couple of countries each year. I am from a little town called Kuching in Malaysia. It's in Borneo, where orangutans live. And I always thought that coming from that type of context, I could go into many of my contexts now and not really care too much about when I brush my teeth using bottled water. I don't know whether any one of you guys have actually traveled to Cambodia or to any of these places where you get this health notice from your doctor saying, use bottled water, don't use the shower, and all these different things. And for me, I was like, I'm from Malaysia. I've grown up in the jungle. I know what that's all about. Fast forward to last year, Cambodia. Just remember being really, really naive, which is actually a story of Thank You. But just brushing my teeth as I was showering, which is just a really random concept, just opening my mouth like in a shower. I was like, you know what, Pete, I can do this. And at the end of that, picked up a parasite, picked up a worm, and I lost 10 kilos in 5 days. And so, and I'm not the biggest guy as well. I'm not well built like Ryan over here, can hit sixes. So that was massive. And I just remember how important it was when I came back to Australia, got into a round of tablets essentially. And I just, that little thought that occurred to me is how fortunate we all are to be firstly in Australia to have a healthcare system like that. But similarly then, what a great injustice it is that I get to have that treatment just because of where I am and where I was born. So it was a great presentation. Fast forward to Thank You. Just a hand show of who's actually heard of Thank You over the last 2 years? Wow, okay, cool. And who's heard of Thank You previously to that? Cool, awesome. Well, I actually joined Thank You in 2010. So we actually started in 2008. And we were 19. So we had no business experience. We had zero capital or startup costs. But we were really motivated by something called the World Water Crisis, where at that time, 900 million people actually didn't have access to safe water. And we thought, what an incredible injustice that still happens in the world. We found out another figure, though, that helped propel Thank You. We found out that in Australia, the bottled water industry is worth $600 million. And we're probably the only bottled water company in Australia that says it's an incredibly stupid industry. And we can say that hand on heart. We think it is incredibly stupid. So we thought, okay, if there's 900 million people in the world that don't have safe access to water, and we have an incredibly stupid bottled water industry, how do we combine these two figures to actually, we've all done this before, I'm just being really honest, where we've forgotten to bring our refillable bottles out, or we don't want to pay for Coke, or we don't want to pay for another soft drink, and we've slapped ourselves in the head, but we've purchased a bottle of water And we've all done that. So we thought, you know what, the bottled water industry isn't going away, but how do we actually leverage that and actually turn it into something good? So that's kind of the origin story. And before I kind of talk about how we think about impact and how we do impact as well, I thought I might just share a bit of our story, just in case you guys, don't know too much about where we are, where we're going, and what we've done previously. But this is us. We exist 100% to help end global poverty. And how do we do that? We are funders. So we use 100% of profits that we get from not just bottled water now, but for body care products, for food products. And we give that away to really effective organizations, which I'll talk to you guys about a bit later. It hasn't been easy though. Just to be really honest with you guys, the first 3 years of this journey was one of the hardest things that we've ever done before. In fact, if you look at how much we were able to give, bless you, how much we were able to give in the first 3 years, if our 3 co-founders at that time actually worked full-time jobs, minimum wage, and gave away 10% of their income, we'll actually be able to outgive what our first 3 years of thank you was. So we gave away $7,000 in the first year, $7,000 in the second year, $21,000 in the third year. And so at that stage, we'd encountered every single problem that you can ever imagine of starting a brand new business. A brand new business with a radical model as well. We had encountered well, I would say the harsh retail environment where businesses didn't really care about your cause. We had encountered people within the business world that would say one thing and do another. An excellent example is our first ever product launch, which is the water bottles, going into about a couple of different stockers, and that was supposed to be the happiest day of our life. But we found out after looking at the bottles that the actual packaging was scrunched up beyond all recognition. And that was our day one. And we were just calling up our factories at the time saying, how did that happen? And they're like, oh, hey, funny you should say that. Our QA guy actually was on holidays and he never actually checked that. And our first product launch was the national product recall, which ends global brands. Fast forward 3 years later, we had worked our way up into about 500 stockers, and that was just sheer like cold calling, going to different cafes, just pitching our ideas, pitching our heart out. And then we just found out that we lost 80% of our business in 1 month, and we were scratching our head and we're like, what's going on? And we called up a couple of cafes and like, your stock never came through. And then we rang the factory up again and they were saying, oh, hey, your bottles were actually not as important because X and Y company are now our new clients. And so we've actually delayed your bottled water production for a month. And that ended 80% of our business. And so at that time, we would experience a lot of broken promises. We'd experience the harsh reality of being really naive in this business. But the challenges that we had, so the challenges that we always encounter, which is firstly a lack of experience and also a lack of funds to convince our retailers and big retailers to actually stock thank you, because they will require millions and millions of dollars of marketing spend just so that they know that consumers would actually pay for it. We didn't have that. And so these different challenges was actually a catalyst for our innovation. I'll talk about what we've done. So in every single pitch meeting that we had with one of the biggest, or all 3 of the biggest retailers here in Australia, their number one concern was no one is going to buy it because no one actually knows about your brand. You don't have $1 million marketing budget, you don't have any TVCs, you don't have any radio ads, so why would people even buy it? But everywhere we went and everywhere we pitched our hearts out and every single conversation we had with a stranger, they all bought into it. And we're like, no, come on, like people will actually buy it if you stock it. And they're like, no way, we're not gonna do that. So we decided to launch innovative social media campaigns. And bear in mind, this is before the golden age of Snapchat and Instagram. This is like Facebook, MySpace days. So in 2011, if anyone remembers MySpace. But yeah, 2011, we launched something called the 7-Eleven campaign. It's not up there, but it's a precursor to this Coles and Woolies campaign, in which we asked all of the supporters to jump on the walls of 7-Eleven and said, hey, 7-Eleven, if you actually bought it, if you actually stock Thank You water, we would actually buy it. And we had a cheeky campaign website where it says, there's a green button that says, do you want 7-Eleven to stock it? Click this button, this green button says yes if you do, or this red button which says no if you don't. And we got a call from one of the buyers from 7-Eleven, and they said, hey, we actually tried to click the no button and it just didn't take us anywhere. What's with that? It's kind of like social media campaign 101. Long story short, it was the fastest product ranging ever in 7-Eleven's history after that campaign ended. And we kind of used that same model for Coles and Woolies. And as we know, in Australia, we have a duopoly within the retailers. And once again, after 5 years, we haven't been able to get any of our products stocked in Coles and Woolies, doing the traditional pitch our ideas to them in a boardroom and then getting rejected. So we thought, you know what, it really, really worked. The Power People actually really, really worked for us. So why not do that, but we'll kind of chuck it on steroids. So we launched a incredible one-take video for Coles and Woolies, which had about 100,000 views in that month. Then we also cheekily flew helicopters with a banner saying, hey, Coles, if you like to change the world, like, come say yes. And we flew that around the headquarters of Coles. And also the same with Woolies, because, you know, we wanted to be fair. It was really cool, but because Peter and Jeff, who are actually the helicopter operators, they donated the time and services for free. And it's something in our journey where we didn't have, let's say, the business know-how. We didn't actually have the money, but what we did have was people. And central to Thank You is this concept of empowering people to make a difference in this world, which translates into sort of my role and what we look at. And finally, really recently, last year, one of the key questions that we always get asked from business leaders is, how do you guys scale? Especially because you have only one shareholder, and that's a charitable trust, because that's the 100% model. We will never have another shareholder because we think that to make profit for other shareholders just totally defeats that 100% model. So when people ask, how do you scale, especially when we wanted to launch into nappies, when we wanted to launch into new product categories, how do we do that? And we didn't know, to be honest. So we just thought, okay, how do we do this? What we did have, though, in our last eight years of our journey has been the fact that our story has actually reached a lot of people. And people have always asked us, hey, you guys would do amazing if you wrote a book. And just shared learnings and how that can apply to different people for whatever walks of life. And so we did that, but we also kind of changed the game, so to speak. We launched the only book that we know of that is in landscape mode, because it's a metaphor for if you want to do something, you've got to change the game. If you want to make a difference, you've got to actually change the game. So that's something else. That's something that we did. And also something else is we actually did a pay what you want price on this book. And so we did our sums, and we knew that we needed to raise about $1.2 million in order for us to launch a new category, as well as launch into a new country. And the stats in Australia show that a best-selling book sells about 5,000 copies, and we'd be lucky to make around $50,000. So 1.2 million, 50,000, we just went for it. Once again, true Thank You style. Some people in that campaign paid 50 cents. We still have their credit card details and address. They'll be getting visits soon. But also, some people generously donate thousands of dollars. At the end of that campaign, we raised 1.4 million, and we sold thanks. And we sold 55,000 copies in 1 month. And I think it's up to 70,000 now, just organically. But yeah, that's sort of our business story. And I suppose it's this concept of empowerment. The stats that we just heard has now increased to $5.5 million across the last 8 years. And it's really, really exciting, not just because of the amount of money that we've been able to give, but also what we've been able to give to. And just in the next couple of minutes, I was going to say, I just want to talk a bit about our impact. Here are our wonderful partners. They're both big and they're both small as well. And we, as funders, we look at our partners and we look at how that aligns with us as being one of the key measurements of whether they're doing really effective work. Here are our partner values, and I just want to focus on one, which is learning and evidence over there. We truly believe that the kind of appetite for an organization to actually capture impartial as well as really validated evidence to show that there's transformation happening within a desired context actually shows how deeply they care about the people they serve. And so we've articulated that, and there's a couple of measurements that we've actually used to really, really objectively measure whether our impact partners are actually doing this. I'll jump really quickly across because I know that we actually have run out of time, but I want to talk to you guys about maternal child health. And the statistics there are incredibly shocking. I think one mum every 103 seconds now dies from preventable causes while in childbirth. There's about 5.9 million children under 5 that die from preventable causes as well each year, most of that happening within the first week of their life. And then you've got this other kind of, we'll talk about cost-effective analysis, where some of the most cost-effective treatments for maternal child health are actually vaccinations. And there was a recent study that showed that the cost-benefit relationship for every dollar invested in vaccinations equals a $44 return. And that's, incredible. But more so than that, we look at partners like One Heart Worldwide, who work in the most remote, the most inaccessible places, and they're in Nepal. And this is a network of safety. And they tackle both structural change, community change, as well as individual change. And they believe that holistically, that's the real kind of secret in ending these preventable deaths. Some of the amazing results from that is in Dolpa, one of the most inaccessible place. We've never been there because it's a 21-day trek. 21, and there's no roads there. But they've had one of the highest rates, as you can tell by the graphs, of maternal and child deaths, or neonatal, they would just kind of define, in the world, essentially. But you can see over the last 3 years of them being in that actual region, they've narrowed down by 90%. And I think that's something that's incredible. And as I wrap up, I think that more so than just having a great business and just selling great products, we're really, really keen on looking at every single area of what we fund, which is either WASH, maternal child health, food and livelihoods, and seeing real evidence to show what our actual consumer power is going towards. Because it's no use just raising a lot of money and giving it away for impact, which might actually do more harm than good. We actually believe that, the true testament of our vision and achieving that is working with the best partners to serve the most marginalized population and groups with the most effective solutions. So thank you so much. Oh, I'll just end. That is what our current set is. So we've been able to impact 755,000 people globally in 20 countries since 8 years. Sorry. Thanks so much, guys.
Fantastic, Pete. Yeah. Thank you so much. Dolpa, 21-day trek. Ryan, I'm just thinking might be your next canoe trip with you and your pals. So, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Professor Fiona Wood, she's a real joy to meet and to hear speak. I've had the pleasure of introducing her a few times. She is smart, and she is funny, and she is tough, and that comes through with her presentations. She, of course, rose to great prominence, particularly after the Bali bombings some years back, because she was the woman one of the team who helped pioneer the spray-on skin technology, RECELL. And we got to know her, and we got to like her. We got to like her so much, we made her Australian of the Year in 2005, and she is an indefatigable worker for her foundation. Sadly, she can't be with us today, but we're going to meet her, courtesy of what you might call a sort of a shortish film. So, as they say in the classics, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we meet, via video, Professor Fiona Wood. Oh, really? It's nothing. I'm just pressing play on the laptop.
Hi, it's Fiona Wood here. First of all, my apologies for not being with you in person at the launch of Effective Altruism, which I think is so important. I think it's an extraordinarily important cause that we all understand the value of altruism. We understand the value of helping each other and particularly helping those when they need it. And to make sure that that is effective, our giving is effective, is extraordinarily important because certainly from my perspective, what I've seen is there's no such thing as altruism without personal gain. Because you see that by giving, you help someone. That's a very, very strong positive feedback to go back again and help some more. So in thinking about that and in reflecting on my personal story, I'd have to say it started a long time ago, a little bit too long these days, and it started when I was at school. It started when I was at a Quaker school as a teenager. And the story for the school was underpinned by the school motto, not for oneself but for others, and run by the Society of Friends. So as school children, we were used to the concept of engaging in charity and community work, engaging in an understanding that our education gave us a point of privilege that we shouldn't take for granted and that we should share our skills with those of the community around us. So as I hit the ground running as I went to medical school in 1975, when probably a lot of you wouldn't even thought of that, I was in a space where I saw an enormous amount of technology and energy driving the barriers of knowledge forward. It just so happened that I found myself extraordinarily interested and passionate about the plastic and reconstructive surgery I saw. I saw people being rebuilt after extreme injuries and congenital deformities. And I saw that the clinical care that was delivered at the coalface was as a result of a massive amount of research in technology, in science, in the clinical translation. And in understanding how to drive that knowledge forward, I understood quite clearly that had to be funded. And so, as I fast forwarded in my journey through as a junior doctor, and through the training programs that sort of feels like you're a bit of seaweed that's not from one sort of tied to the other, I learned a lot along the way. I learned that you can stand up and be counted, and you can actually make a difference even though you're right at the bottom of the pile. And to illustrate that, I think it would be useful for me maybe to share with you the story of the spray-on skin cells and how that came about. As I look back now, I sprayed skin cells on that Marie Stoner, the scientist I worked with at the time in 1995, developed with me in the laboratory. That's actually over 20 years ago. But it started even before then. As it started, as I was watching the clinical work, that I was watching the research work in plastic and reconstructive surgery in the south of England. I then married, and I married a West Australian who told me, non-negotiable, you marry me, you live in Perth, and that's not Scotland. And so I found myself in 1987 with 2 small children here in Western Australia. I had watched the whole concept of cells being grown, the whole concept of tissue expansion. When somebody is so massively injured, they haven't got spare parts. So to take a little piece of skin from an area that's not injured and go into the laboratory and we could grow those skin cells, that laboratory-based tissue expansion had been started in Boston in the late 1970s. It had been clinically used in the 1980s in Boston on patients whose area of burn was so much that they couldn't use traditional techniques. And I learnt about that by reading the publications that would eventually get to here by boat, because it took so long sometimes. This is pre-internet. And so when I arrived here, I had the understanding that there was a better tomorrow. And as I saw patients who were suffering from burn injury, it became a personal challenge to make sure that I could learn something each day to make sure tomorrow was better. as we drove that knowledge forward and that clinical practice forward. And so as a junior doctor in 1990, I met a patient who had a massive burn injury and who was fading and slipping through our fingers like sand as the waves of infection were relentless and her body weakened. And as I was driving along one morning, I heard a radio station interview with a scientist in Melbourne called Joanne Podlanetsky, who was working for Professor John Masterton, who ran the Alfred Hospital Burns Unit. And they had gone to Boston and they brought the technology to grow skin cells back here to Australia. To cut a long story short, I managed to coerce everyone, the consultant in charge of the case, the consultants in intensive care, and to allow us to take the last piece of skin from this lady and send it to Melbourne. But how to send it to Melbourne? I coerced Ansett. And that was an airline a long time ago, okay, probably before some of you were born. And they came to the party and with the couriers, all for free, all doing pro bono work, taking the skin to Melbourne. And 3 weeks later, they brought the skin back to Royal Perth Hospital, where we were able to go into the bone marrow laboratories and prepare the skin ready for the operation. The operation went well. We were now 5 months post-injury, and everything went well. We were very happy that the skin had taken and that the patient had healed. Only some 8 weeks later, to be faced with her sudden cardiac arrest, her heart stopping, from which we couldn't recover because she had an infection in her heart. I then realised that the time to healing was the most important thing in reducing all the risks and reducing the suffering. And so in the early 90s, hitting the ground running in 1991, I drove the whole concept of tissue engineering very hard, looking for how we could fund it here in Western Australia, engaging with community groups, engaging with Telethon, and Telethon provided the funds from all the mums and dads and kids of Western Australia to build our first laboratory and to fund Marie, who I had found working equally crazily in the bone marrow laboratories, and the two of us together started the laboratory here in 1993. The research was funded by the Cherry Pickers Association, by the Country Music Festival. My children, I think, are still mortified by me speaking very too loudly over the loud speakers while people are boot scooting in a field covered in mud, but whereas people were raising funds for us. So along the way, other ideas came our way. At the time, I saw a few private patients. I treated private patients 1 day a week, and a friend of mine suggested that because I wasn't apparently charging enough, that I could send a letter to the patients and suggest that if they would like to donate to the charity in lieu of the surgical fee, that could be tax deductible. And so we've established the McComb Foundation. Harold McComb was a plastic and reconstructive surgeon of extraordinary ability and extraordinary intellect, and an extraordinarily strong supporter who taught me many things. But the thing that I will take with me all the way through my life is always to learn, as I've said already, from today to make tomorrow better. And so the people that we operated on donated. It was extraordinarily generous of many people as we went forward. We were supported by the Rain Foundation in the University of WA as we gained ground and we became more competitive in the competitive granting era and have had NHMRCs as grants as we've gone forward. But we've always been supported by our community here. We've always been supported by the corporate entities within our community here. And the one notable story is Woodside, who have supported us since the late 90s when we started working with them on a disaster plan as they're building the Northwest Gas Shelf capacity, and understanding that burn injuries in that industry is so important and making sure we work closely together. And by working closely together, they and Chevron and many others have supported us in our endeavours and our research endeavours going forward. And so as we then moved into the space where we understood how to expand skin in a way that we could do it faster, we started with the laboratory, and the traditional techniques take 3 weeks to grow skin cell sheets. And we now managed with different technology and introducing different aspects and listening to what other people were doing around the world, managed to reduce that to 10 days. But by 1995, we'd understood that if we sprayed the skin cells on in a solution form, they were active and more sticky on the surface and were more robust, paradoxically. And we could achieve that in 5 days. We pushed even further because we realised that we could take the first steps of the tissue engineering laboratory process and put it in a box in a small kit, such that we could take that kit to the bedside, and that kit takes us 30 minutes to harvest the skin, and is what we use here now, and which we commercialised in 2002. And the commercialisation is another arm that we've used for funding our research. By assigning our intellectual property to the Research Foundation, the McComb Foundation, and apologies now is morphed by my colleagues into the Fiona Wood Foundation. By assigning our intellectual properties to the foundation, we assigned all our royalties over to the foundation, and we were able to allow a commercial process that would support us into the future. And so it's the kit that is commercialised initially by clinical cell culture that we established, but that's gone on and is now an international company called Avita Medical, with its base still here in Perth, but also in Cambridge and in Los Angeles. And so now we're in a space where that commercialisation, that intellectual property, has helped support us going into the future. I hope I've given you some kind of flavour that altruism comes in many, many forms. Our patients have been extraordinary supporters along the way, their families, the communities around us that have never met someone that's got burn injuries, that just really have been very solid in actually understanding that we are able to deliver a change in life by our research going forward, and by our corporate entities, by our competitive grants, and by our commercial entities. All this comes together, really focusing on one thing: can we reduce the suffering from what is a terrible injury? And I'm pleased to say, 25 years later, the answer is yes. Have we made progress? Absolutely. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Because there's always tomorrow. And we should never criticise today, we should make it the best it can be. And I congratulate you all for being there today. What you're doing by understanding the power of giving, understanding that we can offer the hand of help and the hand of friendship. And by doing so, we'll learn more about ourselves, often, than we will help others. And by putting that all together to make sure that that help is effective and does the job, is to be applauded. So I'd just like to say thank you. I would like to be there with you to listen to all your ideas, but I'm sure I will get to know about things as you develop into the future and as you grow. And so good luck and all the best, and I thank you, not just from me, because I believe so strongly in this, but from all those people who will help in the future.
Is that right, Alistair? I am informed, you are very polite, by the way, to applaud for a woman who's not in the room. And well-bred, I like that. And I'm informed reliably that we are trending on Twitter, hashtag EAA launch at number 21. Not even the top 20 people. If you have a mobile device within your reach for it, press the Twitter icon and send out a tweet. I don't care about the content, just use the hashtag EAA launch. We want to hit the top 10, surely that's possible, isn't it? Okay, please. All right. We work, well, Effective Altruism Australia works with a very select band of partner charities, one of which is Give Directly. If you don't know, Give Directly has a particular model. It gives cash directly to individuals in Uganda and Kenya. And that model is rather different, and I dare say rather daring, because of course if you give that individual that cash, we do not know what he or she might do with it, and we might have some ideas about what they might do with it. So far, the evidence is in, and if there wasn't evidence, we wouldn't be partnering with them, I presume, that money given to individuals changes their spending patterns indeed, and they tend to spend more on basic needs. And that classic cliche fear, which I don't think is unreasonable necessarily, that it'll all be spent on tobacco, booze and all the rest of it, seems to be unfounded. So it's quite an interesting model. We're going to meet the co-founder of Give Directly via a very short video. So I'd like to introduce to you, digitally speaking, and I want applause, by the way, because you've set a precedent, to Paul Niehaus, co-founder of Give Directly. Big applause, please. Please keep your applause. Sustain it, please. Come on, whilst I just work through this.
Hey, folks. Paul Niehaus from Give Directly. It's really exciting to be with you today to celebrate the launch of Effective Altruism in Australia. Please know that you have friends and allies around the globe, including our team here at Give Directly. We are grateful to count many of you as supporters and excited to work with you to grow the movement in Australia. I personally am bullish on the potential of the Effective Altruism movement for good, and admittedly with a bit of bias. Give Directly, I think, arguably would not exist today if it were not for Effective Altruism. See, when we started, this idea of giving money to poor people was seen as crazy. We had funders who flat out told us, you must be smoking crack. And we didn't have great marketing collateral or YouTube videos. We had data. We had reams and reams of data showing that actually poor people had a very consistent track record of putting money to use to improve their lives, whether that was investing in productive assets or sending their kids to school or so on. Now Give Directly is one of the fastest growing nonprofits in recent decades, and I think inarguably because it has grown up alongside this community of people who take data seriously when thinking about where to give and how to live. But all that having been said, as we look to the future and think about growing the movement, I want to urge you to remember that the bulk of the altruism in the world today is not effective altruism. Let's call it normal altruism. People who care, but who would not consider themselves a part of this community, and who don't have the time, the training, or the inclination to dig into the data with us. So as we grow, I think it's critical that we keep looking for ways to engage with those folks, to communicate the things that we're learning in ways that don't take a PhD in statistics or philosophy to understand and to buy into. Along those lines, I'd love to have you participate in a simple experiment after today's event is over. We get down to the real work of building the movement. Very simple experiment. I just ask that you pick 5 people who are not in this room and ask them what they think about giving money to poor people. That's it, a very simple question. And then come back and talk to us about what you hear and what happens. You see, we want to make sure you have the data to have effective and thoughtful conversations about this stuff. We also want to make sure you have the tools to connect with people who are not that into data, but share our goals of making the world a better place for humanity. Thanks very much, and bon voyage.
Fantastic. Very kind of you. Interesting, isn't it, that Paul didn't deny the crack allegation? So, they all say that in the docos. You'd be amazed how many people use it. Very high-performing people, blah, blah, blah. All right. I was a journalist with Truth, and we used to get paid to call up Kylie Minogue and ask her if she's an alien, to which she would say no, and thus the headline was Kylie denies alien allegation. That's a true story. All right, career counselling after the show. So, Thomas King joins us, and you are a trooper, Thomas, because chatting with you before the show reveals a very husky voice. You're just hanging in there. Forgive me for saying this, but you look, have you got permission from your parents to be here alone? You're so fresh and so young, yet I read that you already have quite an extensive career in campaigning. You began at the tender age of 13. Ludicrous. Since then, worked on environmental poverty eradication programs and animal protection. Across 5 continents, of course. Raised $1.6 million in one project alone for fighting extreme poverty in Cambodia. Also, as a lovely little sojourn, you featured in an IMAX movie representing Australia in a film created for the UN Climate Summit in Paris. Did anybody see that? It was called I'm Not a Celebrity, I'm Bloody Freezing, Get Me Out of Here. So that was terrific. Your career has taken you many places, and it takes you now to Animals Australia. And I'm a great admirer of the campaigning of Animals Australia. There are, as I mentioned before, there's no shortage of non-profits and awareness-raising organisations and campaigners. Very few have the power to stop billion-dollar industries as often as Animals Australia. Very few have put people into jail as often as you have. Very few are feared and mentioned in Parliament as often as you. And you have taken on the challenge of changing the way we eat, no less, in a way to, if you want to, I don't know, save planet Earth, if you want to alleviate the suffering of animals, and if you wish to, take on mega corporations, meat would probably be your target, and I think that's the target of Thomas King. He's about to talk about it. Please make Thomas very welcome. And also a big welcome to Sam Biddle, who's doing the IT technology trickery. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best to get through the next 20 minutes. I apologise for this horrid voice. I will need to rely on my notes, though, because my brain is not functioning properly. And I will also mention that I created this presentation quite drugged out on codeine, and so I really hope it's coherent. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. That was very grand. Although I guess I would just like to begin by setting the record straight in saying that I'm honestly nothing special. I'm a public school kid from the outer east who's never studied a day at university. I would probably fail a year 7 algebra test if you put one in front of me today. And I binge on Netflix as much as the next person. In fact, the journey that's led me to be standing here tonight actually started with me watching TV. I was 13 at the time, one day after school, and I was watching the ads flash by when I saw an image that's still stuck in the back of my mind. She was young and malnourished, and her name was Kessie, and she was an orangutan who had lost her habitat. And the days earlier, the trees she'd inhabited days earlier had been cleared to make way for oil palm plantations. And this was the first global injustice that I had ever been directly confronted with. And I thought perhaps something like a website could help to educate consumers about this issue. And at the time, I had no clue how to create an African website, but I found a friend who did know, and he kindly taught me. And within a year, the platform was reaching over 500,000 people annually from more than 150 countries. Around this time, I made the decision. I had my my moment, and made the decision that I didn't want to follow the conventional cultural narrative laid out in front of me about pursuing material wealth, but I wanted to do something meaningful with my time and follow a path of purpose. And that single choice is really the only thing that set me apart from my peers at the time. And it sparked what's so far been a 7-year-long journey that's taken me around the globe for a whole variety of projects. And I'm immensely grateful for the experiences I've been able to have. On many occasions, though, I've been given a glimpse into some of the stark realities, some of which I'll share with you now, as well as how those moments collectively have helped me see an enormous opportunity for us to all create widespread change. In 2012, while travelling through the Bornean jungle for a conservation program with an Indigenous community, I saw a logging site for the first time, and it was a barren field of emptiness, robbed of all biodiversity, a true symbol of humanity's destructive ecological footprint. The next year in 2013, I found myself in Samoa reporting at a World Health Organization forum tackling non-communicable and chronic diseases in the Pacific, and I was shocked to see the influence of the Western diet in a place as remote as Samoa, which has a population similar to Geelong. Samoa is a bit like a town plonked on an island, and in the middle is now a McDonald's, helping fuel diet-related chronic diseases that up until recently had only been found in the West, which we're seeing in many parts of the world. In 2014, I encountered quite the opposite while in Cambodia working on a poverty alleviation project called Live Below the Line. I saw people faced with the problem of food scarcity, families struggling to afford the most basic requirements and having to make compromises between sending their children to school or giving them dinner. In 2015, I found myself in Greenland, of all places, in the Arctic Circle, standing on this enormous glacier, ice glacier, kilometres wide, with Professor Jason Box. And he stood there holding this 8-metre tall pole. And as I said up at it, Jason said, this is how much the glacier has melted in the last 6 to 12 months. Over 120 billion litres of water from that single ice glacier alone. Then in 2016, I came face to face with the true horrors of intensive animal agriculture right here in our own backyard. By then I was working for Animals Australia, which, as was mentioned, is an organisation that shines a light on systemic animal cruelty, from factory farming to greyhound racing, through investigations, media exposés and campaigns to empower people to take action. And there I have seen the most senseless forms of animal exploitation within our food system most of the time. Take our treatment of pigs as an example. These gentle animals said to be 3 times as intellectually developed as a dog, crammed into cages barely bigger than their own bodies for months on end, and then eventually cruelly slaughtered using a process that begins with carbon dioxide gassing in underground chambers. During the last 7 years, 3 things have become very clear to me. Firstly, that a broad spectrum of injustices exist in our world, that we therefore must be pragmatic and think with our heads as well as our hearts to identify how we can have the greatest impact possible. And thirdly, that the causes of these issues are often interconnected, meaning that striking at the root could be a way to create the most far-reaching and meaningful change. One of those root causes became acutely apparent to me. While each of these areas contains layers of complexity, I realised a primary factor fueling every one of them in one way, shape or form of all these issues that I'd worked tirelessly to address. And that's the large-scale production and consumption of meat. And let me explain how. So we breed 70 billion land animals annually for food production, and the vast majority, as I mentioned, in these cruel factory farms, where they've cruelty has literally been legalised and commercialised. You could say it's the greatest level of human-inflicted animal suffering to ever have existed on planet Earth. Because the vast majority of these animals are confined in feedlots and factories, they require fodder. And this results in 1/3 of the world's grain harvest, including soy and oats and corn, being funneled into animal agriculture so that a family in Australia or America can enjoy 1 kilogram of cheap meat that required anywhere from 3 to 25 kilograms of grain to be produced. This highly inefficient system drives up the cost, the premium for grain in countries where it's a key source of sustenance, entrenching people in the poverty cycle. Growing this feed and grazing cows requires an awful lot of land. 30% of the world's entire non-ice land surface, to be exact. Forests are cleared to make way, which makes animal agriculture a leader in global deforestation, and according to the UN, one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. And arguably the most concerning of all those environmental problems is climate change. Well, the process of growing livestock and their feed contributes more to global warming and the melting of ice than the entire transportation sector, including 37% of all human-induced methane, which is 28 times more toxic than CO2. And in fact, prior to that Paris Climate Summit, Chatham House announced that even if we were to eradicate fossil fuels, animal agriculture would still push us beyond that 2-degree warming limit. And then there's the consumption of the products themselves, which leading health authorities like the World Health Organization have linked to not only public health crises like antimicrobial resistance, which is a very scary situation, but the most prominent chronic diseases plaguing our society, including heart disease, hypertension and diabetes, whose comprehensive meta-analysis study on cancer in 2015, for those who remember, actually found processed meat and likely red meat as well to be as carcinogenic as arsenic and tobacco. And they're the world's leading health authority. And of course, this also creates an enormous financial burden, with Australia spending 10% of our GDP on healthcare and more than half of that to address chronic diseases that could be reduced through lifestyle and diet changes. So our food system is broken, and it cannot sustain us into the future. It's estimated that with current methods, food production will need to increase at least 70% by mid-century to feed the world's population and accommodate rising affluence. And we know that with rising affluence comes increased protein consumption as well. So I wondered, how on earth can we possibly address these problems and still feed the world at the same time? Now remember, I am not special, so I wasn't surprised when I realised that many people before me had asked that question, and were actually, those who are far cleverer than I am, working on some really groundbreaking solutions. People in the West are actually beginning to eat less meat. 1 in 4 Australians are reducing their consumption or cutting meat out entirely. However, it would be basically impossible to get our entire country, let alone the world, to switch to a traditional plant-based diet at this point. So what if instead we recreated meat that didn't have the same negative consequences? Last year, while speaking in the States, I met some of the people who are doing exactly that. This is the Impossible Burger, made entirely from plants. Its ingredients come from potato, wheat, spinach, coconut oil, and heme from plants, which gives it that bloody, juicy element. Companies like Impossible Foods are experimenting with new and uncommon plant proteins, many of which haven't been used in this kind of application before. In fact, 92% of plant proteins haven't been explored for food before. And this one is the Memphis Meats Clean Meatball, made from real cow cells in a mineral culture of vitamins and water and glucose. It's called clean meat because, like the Impossible Burger, it requires no hormones, no antibiotics, doesn't contain salmonella, campylobacter, and of course, no slaughter.
It tastes like a meatball.
Compelling, really compelling.
I have more. Yeah, this is good.
So companies like Impossible Foods that are rebuilding animal products from plant proteins at the molecular level are already available on the market in the States. They're not only far healthier than standard beef burgers, but they also require 95% less land, 74% less water, and 87% less greenhouse gas emissions. Clean or cultured meat, like Memphis Meats, is still a few years away from commercialisation, and it requires 99% less land, 96% less water, and 90% less pollution than conventional meat. This space is being supported by the likes of Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, and Li Ka-shing, the second richest man in Asia. The executive chairman of Alphabet, Google's parent company, named the consumption of plant-based proteins in place of meat as his number one pick as the game-changing trend of the future. Meat companies are even starting to invest in these innovations, and according to recent Lux research, the market share for plant-based meat alone is expected to reach 33% by mid-century. So the question isn't whether this will occur, the question is how quickly can we get there? Because humanity and our planet and our fellow species cannot afford to wait. There's no doubt that significant barriers exist. Products reaching price competitiveness and equal availability to conventional animal products is imperative, as well as increasing their awareness amongst the public, institutions and government, not only of the products themselves, but the many benefits that they bring. So I wondered whether Australia, down here, whether we could play any role in this globally. Yes, we invest heavily in our livestock sector, and we continue to push animal-based meat onto developing markets as consumption here decreases. But actually, I think that makes Australia ideally placed to become global leaders in the new meat sector, because we're already seen as a trusted supplier of clean, safe protein to the rest of the world. If we leverage that reputation and the enormous demand from Asia for quality, safe, imported protein, Australia could use this to diversify our protein offerings domestically and internationally, at the same time meet our government's objectives to establish new forward-thinking industries that offer jobs for Australians in higher tech manufacturing. To address all of these opportunities and challenges, I'm excited to announce the startup of a new institute that will be dedicated to creating a more healthy and sustainable food supply that doesn't rely on destructive animal agriculture. I'm currently working with a small team to form this body, which will work to accelerate the awareness and acceptance of these new innovations across the Asia Pacific, and work to make them as comparable as possible via the following channels. We plan to utilise research and expert alliances to undertake public and institutional advocacy. at the same time helping boost the growth of comparable alternatives through intersectoral collaboration and industry support. It's still very early days. We're in the middle of forming our initial board and registering and completing branding and applying for tax deductibility under the health promotion category. But we're already in discussion with government bodies, NGOs, universities, food distributors, potential investors and other influencers to determine the best way forward, the most effective route to change. So tonight I welcome anyone here to work with us on this exciting journey. We're looking for advisors and allies, partner organisations, donors and potential future team members. And there will be many people in this room with expertise and contact recommendations, money, skills that I certainly don't have. And so let's collaborate. Come and chat with me afterwards or connect via LinkedIn. Because as I spoke about earlier, I've been fortunate to work on environmental and poverty alleviation, health and animal welfare projects for 7 years. Never before have I seen a solution that has such enormous potential to create widespread positive change in every one of those fields. And that's the very reason that we're all here, right? To create the greatest amount of good that we can. Thank you to Effective Altruism Australia for holding this event and for having me here to speak and for listening to me croak. Thanks.
Actually, just a note to the audiovisual folk to just wipe down that handheld microphone with some thank you sanitizer before we go. Oh, hello, Sam.
G'day.
Good. By the way, I love the thought of a think tank for, clean meat. And I love how when you listed all the things you want, you only mentioned money once. We know what you really want, lots of money. That is just a fantastic initiative. All right. Thanks, Sam. One short final video from, again, one of the partner charities of Effective Altruism Australia, GiveWell. We want to be sure that everything is effective. Thus, we do lots of research. Hello, Alistair. How the devil are you? Can I ask?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We're trending number 3 in Australia.
Oh, we're up to number 3. That's good because I threatened to leave if we didn't hit the top 5 before the end of the night. Top 3. Excellent work.
I think we can push it to 1.
Oh my God, what's number 1 at the moment? Some sporting event, I suppose? Oh my God. Or perhaps a reality television program. I'm not sure. Anyway, 3 men in a canoe. So, GiveWell are the researchers who deeply and broadly analyse charities and programs to find out if they are indeed effective. After all, that's what we're all about. And short video from Catherine Hollander from the gorgeous city of San Francisco, where she is the research analyst with GiveWell. Even though she's not here, what the hell? Show us some appreciation.
Greetings from San Francisco. I'm Catherine Hollander, a research analyst that focuses on outreach at GiveWell. GiveWell is a nonprofit dedicated to finding outstanding giving opportunities and publishing the full details of our analysis to help donors decide where to give. We started in 2007 to help donors like you find the most effective places to give their donations. In 2015, donors using our research gave over $110 million to the charities we recommend. We think that's a lot of good in the world. We currently recommend 7 top charities, some of which you'll be hearing from tonight. The Against Malaria Foundation, Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, End Fund's Deworming Program, Malaria Consortium's Seasonal Malaria Chemo Prevention Program, Site Savers Deworming Program, the Deworm the World Initiative, and Give Directly. They distribute anti-malaria bed nets, treat intestinal parasites among young school children, deliver preventive anti-malarial drugs to young children, and provide direct cash transfers to very poor individuals. We think these represent some of the best places in the world to make your donations. They're evidence-backed, cost-effective, and in need of additional funding. We're also looking to help develop the next group of top charities through GiveWell's incubation grants work, where we support promising earlier stage organizations that might potentially become top charities in the future. We've also supported academic research into promising programs and monitoring and evaluation of charities. We're enthusiastic about this work and excited to see the developments in this space. We're so glad to be part of the launch of Effective Altruism Australia and the Effective Altruism movement as a whole. We have over 2,000 donors in Australia who use our research, and we're so glad to see their interest in our work. Effective altruists in particular have been extremely helpful at spreading the word about GiveWell's top charities, and we really appreciate everything that they've done to encourage people to donate to effective organizations. Thank you so much. We're so excited to be part of this.
Thank you, Catherine, once again. All right, folks, Professor Peter Singer is about to take the stage. I suggest 30 seconds to stand up, roll the shoulders, take some deep breaths, and get your full attention.
As well as so anyone who hasn't used it before, using the code just gets $5
How long does that last for?
I think it's till April or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. $25 free.
Fantastic.
And maybe mention these guys webcasting.
Oh,
they
yes.
gave us a half price for the streaming.
Webcasting.
Yeah, thank you for their support with discounted streaming services.
Yep. Oh, 15 seconds, folks. Thanks, folks. Grab your seats. Professor Peter Singer is about to take the lectern. And by the way, Rest House Float Centre, we will get their hospitality to you before you leave the venue. We'd also like to note that we've been supported by Uber Eats. If you haven't used that, it's similar to the Uber Ride app, except it delivers you food with the presses of about 5 buttons it took me to order 2 pizzas last Friday night. And we have, that's progress, people. That's innovation. I'm not kidding. $50, 2 pizzas, done. And we have a $25 credit for you. So if you have Uber Eats or if you download the app, there's a $25 credit waiting for you with the code word effective. Simple as that. Wow, you guys know important people. And I would like to acknowledge Webcasting, who are making it possible to stream this via Facebook. Hello, we haven't forgotten you. And you, I know, were very, very generous in your pricing to be here tonight. Thank you. I know we probably threatened you and your family to get it, but we appreciate it greatly. Thank you kindly. All right, folks. Professor Peter Singer is about to join us. It's also, it struck me how mainstream it is to talk about animal welfare here, by the way, and there was a time when it was not, and there was a time, of course, where we'd all be sitting here smoking right now inside the room, and that was not that long ago. But now, of course, that's absurd and, amusing to even consider. So who knows what the future will bring. Professor Peter Singer has been in many battles for a long time. He's the Ira W. DeCamp Professor of Bioethics in the University Centre for Human Values at Princeton University, a role he counterbalances or balances as he's also the Laureate Professor at the University of Melbourne. Your beliefs and your areas of expertise have led to many controversies over the years. Australia doesn't always treat its public intellectuals so well. Tall poppy syndrome is alive and well. I know. I myself have an associate diploma in professional writing and editing from Holmes Glen College of TAFE. So we've both lived this life of the mind. And after the show, if you want to compare leather patches on jackets and drink sherry, I'm available to you. It's a nicety us intellectuals have. You won't also recall, but when I was 27 years of age or something in 1997, I interviewed you, and I think you were at Monash University then. Does that correct? For a very small scale, low budget video documentary series I was helping make for students, and we got you to talk about all manner of things, whatever we could extract from you. I don't know how many lines from conversations from 20 years ago that you can remember, but I remember one that you gave me, and you said that this prosperity that we were experiencing was very, very recent, was very, very narrowly experienced, and was very, very fragile. And that has stuck with me for 2 decades, and it has proven to be. And it's taken me a hell of a lot of therapy to get over that truth, but thanks for dropping that bomb on me. Peter, we really appreciate your availability to media. We know that you were on the John Fain Conversation Hour with Daniel de Hockman yesterday. I hope you listened. You can download that and listen to it anytime you wish. And you will be on Q&A on Monday night on ABC. Am I got that right? On the 27th. Okay. Rest assured, Jackie Lambie's been on recently, so you probably won't be alongside her. Ladies and gentlemen, please make him very welcome, Professor Peter Singer.
Thank you very much for that welcome. Thank you, Brett, for that introduction and quoting back that line that I must admit wasn't on the tip of my tongue. But I also want to thank all of the people who've organised this great event. It's a real experience to be here at the launch of Effective Altruism Australia. Kind of completes a long journey in a way for me, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I do want to thank everybody who's been involved in putting this together. I know it takes a lot of people. Daniel's the one who particularly was in contact with me, but there are a lot of other people who've had to work hard to make it happen and to bring you all together and to have this great lineup of speakers. So congratulations. Now, I've got a 20-minute slot, but I would also like to hear from some of you to get some questions or comments before I close. So I'm not going to use all of that for talking myself, but I thought I would just say a little bit about why, as I just said a moment ago, this completes a long journey for me, and why it's a really interesting stage to be at, to have an effective altruism movement here in Australia as part of a larger worldwide movement. I got interested in the question of global poverty and what we ought to do about it at about the same time that I got interested in some of the questions that Thomas King was talking about animal suffering back in the early 1970s when I was a graduate student at Oxford. I studied here at the University of Melbourne and then was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go on and study in Oxford. And that was a very formative period for me. Because I'd been studying philosophy and particularly ethics, but philosophy at that time was not really very practical. Mostly what you got was some history of philosophy and some analysis of the meanings of moral terms, what did words like ought and good actually mean, but you didn't get substantive theories about what we ought to do, and in particular philosophy didn't really address practical problems like what ought we to do about global poverty or what is the moral status of animals. It was still very much at a theoretical level. But there was starting to be some change, and the change was occurring in part because the late 1960s was a period of a lot of student ferment, a lot of student protest. As an undergraduate at the University of Melbourne, I was involved in protests against the Vietnam War and against conscription. And there was also around the same time a demand from students that courses should be more relevant to the issues of the day. Issues like war, issues like racism, the civil rights movement in America particularly, which also had some echoes here. So that led me to start to think about some of these questions. More or less accidentally, I encountered a Canadian student who was an ethical vegetarian, something that you'd never really heard of. I think he was probably the first vegetarian that I'd met, and this was all the way through my, got to be a graduate student. And, well, if there were any other vegetarians I'd met, perhaps they were Hindus who was where it was part of their culture to be vegetarian. But certainly somebody who was a vegetarian for secular ethical reasons was pretty much unheard of. And I talked to him and I started thinking about him, and he he was effectively challenging me to defend the way that the meat on my plate, because we were having this conversation over lunch where he was eating a salad and I was eating a spaghetti bolognese, what had happened to that animal, and how could I, as a philosophy student studying ethics, defend that? And eventually, after some hard thought, that led me to decide that I couldn't. But around the same sort of time, I suppose, I was thinking about what are the obligations of people like me, and I certainly was living on a scholarship then. I didn't have a lot of money to spare, but still I was reasonably comfortably off. I could meet my basic needs. My wife and I could think about going across to the Channel to France in the summer holidays and doing that kind of travel. So, there we were, and there we knew there were people elsewhere in the world who didn't really have any reliable food supply, couldn't rely on being able to feed their families all year round, didn't have any kind of health care, whereas we were covered by the National Health Service living in Britain, didn't have safe drinking water. I was aware of all those things, and lots of people were aware of those things, but there was no real thought about, well, what does that mean for us? Okay, if somebody on the street shakes a can in front of us and says, give to help reduce starvation in Africa or India or somewhere like that, maybe you would put a few coins in the tin. But didn't really go beyond that kind of level. And I did want to think about this. I thought about it in the context of a crisis that was developing then in what is now Bangladesh, was then East Pakistan, was then part of the country of Pakistan, and essentially a part that, despite an election at which they'd elected a party that was campaigning for more autonomy from West Pakistan, that was being brutally repressed by the Pakistani army, and 9 million refugees fled across the border into India, which was a much poorer country then than it is today, and really did not have the means to sustain them. So that's triggered my thought about, well, what ought we to be doing about this? And I concluded that it wasn't enough to put those coins in the tin when it was rattled under your nose, that we could save lives at relatively modest cost to ourselves. And I thought of this analogy, which has since become a sort of semi-famous thing, at least among philosophers, of walking past a shallow pond in which a child has fallen, and you could rescue the child by jumping into the pond, but you would ruin your most expensive shoes that you'd put on by doing so. Would the fact that the child was not your responsibility, and you would not in any way cause the child to be in danger, would that fact excuse you if you said, oh no, I don't want to ruin my shoes, I'm just going to leave that child and walk on by? And obviously everybody that you pose that question to says, no, that would not excuse you. A child's life is much more important than your shoes, no matter how expensive they might be. So I used that then to argue, well, we are effectively walking by people who are in danger of starving or dying of easily preventable illnesses by not donating to charities that are helping those people. And I wrote that up in an article called Famine, Affluence and Morality, which was published in a new journal, called Philosophy and Public Affairs, that had been founded precisely to discuss in philosophical ways major questions of the day, something that, as I said, had not really been happening. Now, that article was successful in the sense that a lot of other philosophers talked about it, and that's one thing you want if you publish an article in a journal. You don't want it to just be ignored. But the way in which it was discussed was mostly about, well, look, here's an interesting argument. It seems to have premises that look pretty sound, like, if we can save a life at little cost, we ought to do so. But it has conclusions that suggest that we all ought to be giving a substantial part of what we have to help people in extreme poverty. And that's just, morality can't be that demanding. It can't be that essentially all of us are doing something wrong just by sitting here and enjoying our lives. We're not harming anyone. We're not breaking any of those thou shalt not commandments. So how could it be that we are actually living unethically? So that was the tone in which the article was taken by many of, the professors, and later when I became one, my colleagues. It got reprinted in a lot of anthologies, so a lot of students got exposed to it over the years, taking philosophy courses in which they read that article. But, so it was published in 1972, so I think you could say pretty much for the next 30 years, it didn't have a huge impact. It got discussed, as I was saying, but you couldn't see large numbers of people acting on it. You couldn't really say in any way that there was a movement that responded to it. But that did start to change, I guess, around the end of the 20th century. One thing that happened then in '99 was I came to Princeton, and there were some protests about my appointment at Princeton, not because of my views on animals or global poverty, but because of my views on things like physician assistance in dying or voluntary euthanasia, and some of the questions I raised about the sanctity of human life that were, particularly in the United States, were considered very provocative. But although that led to some uncomfortable moments, it did have the effect that people knew that I'd come to Princeton. There was attention about it. And I got an invitation from the New York Times Sunday magazine to write an article on whatever I liked for their magazine, which gives you quite a bit of space, and that was a nice opportunity. So I wrote an article about what I was just talking about because I thought this would be a more positive thing. I guess I was wanting to foist off some of the attacks and say, look, I'm really in favour of saving human life, and there's lots of human lives you could be saving if you want to. This is something that I've been saying for a number of years. So I wrote that article, which the Times put the headline on. It wasn't mine, saying the Singer solution to world poverty. It was a bit of an exaggeration, I thought. But it did get, that reaches obviously millions of readers rather than the small number that the articles in philosophy journals do, or even when they're reprinted in anthologies. And people did start to think about that and talk about that. And this was also a period at which Bill Gates was setting up, Bill and Melinda Gates, I should say, were setting up the Gates Foundation. And so here was some very influential, very wealthy person who was actually saying, look, it would be bad of me just to sit on my great wealth. I can do a lot of good things with it, and I want to actually do things to help the poorest people in the world and to save the greatest number of lives that I can. And that was getting some attention, and gradually I think people started to think about this. The first indication that I had that there was some sort of movement building was when I went to Oxford and talked to another philosophy graduate student, as he then was, who also actually is Australian, Toby Ord, who was planning to start an organisation called Giving What We Can, which was really, I think, the first effective altruism movement, because he both thought that we ought to give a lot. He actually had himself a very demanding standard. He essentially was going to decide to continue to live on his graduate studentship after he got an academic job. He would give the rest of it away. A little, adjusted for inflation, but give pretty much the rest of it away. And he calculated that he would, with that money that he would have over his lifetime, working out his career earnings and deducting what he would need to live on, he calculated that he could prevent 80,000 people going blind by giving to one of the organisations that was effectively preventing people from going blind from trachoma, or perhaps performing surgeries to restore sight on people with cataracts. And he thought that was an amazing thing to do, and more people should know about that, and he wanted to publicise that and encourage other people to pledge, not to do what he was doing, but to pledge to give 10% of their earnings to the most effective charities they could find. And the other key factor that came into this was, you just heard from, in fact, was the founding of GiveWell in 2007 by Holden Karnofsky and Ellie Hassenfeld, which I heard about from an article in the New York Times reporting what they were doing, that here were these two young hedge fund guys who'd earned a lot of money, decided to give some of it away to charities, but wanting to find out where they could do the most good. And being hedge fund analysts, they were kind of data nerds, they wanted some information on this. But when they looked around the charity field, they found there wasn't really good data on which charities are the most effective. And so essentially they left the hedge fund with some support from some of their colleagues and set up GiveWell as a non-profit organisation to do research and to find out which charities actually do get the best value for your dollar. And that's been immensely important, because when I started talking about these issues again in the first decade of this century, I also wrote a book that spun off the earlier Times article called The Life You Can Save. When I started talking about it, even sort of here in Australia, going on talkback radio, what you would get is people saying, well, yeah, it would be great if we could help the poor, but I know these charities, you give to them and they take 90% of, every 90 cents in every dollar that you give to them, they swallow up in administration, and there's just about nothing that gets to the people who, need it. Well, that is not true of any of the big name charities and never has been true, but to actually refute that and to say, look, there's good research on which charities are really going to use pretty much all of your money. In fact, say with Give Directly, it goes the other way around. Every dollar you give, 90 cents goes actually into the bank accounts of some of the world's poorest people in Kenya and Uganda. They do need some, every organisation needs to spend something on administration, so don't begrudge them the 10%, even if it were 20%. They need to make sure that this all happens, that it works. They need to do the research to the randomised controlled studies to show that it's actually working and having positive effects. So yes, it can't be 100%, but when you get that kind of ratio, you'll know you're doing an immense amount of good. So it's in these last 15 years or so that there really has been this movement starting, and it's been great to see it. I've spoken at many different places in the world now, addressing groups of effective altruism in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Switzerland, in France, in the Netherlands, and often by Skype in places like Singapore and Hong Kong. In fact, I've got a Skype lined up, the first for me, with University of Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan. And they're talking about effective altruism there as well. So it really is a worldwide movement, and I think it's a very exciting stage to be in, and that's why I'm excited to be here, and again congratulate all of you who have been involved with it. Now, I hope I have left you a few minutes, not very many, but if people would like to ask a question or make a comment, let's have a couple of minutes to do that.
Absolutely. An opportunity to ask Professor Peter Singer whatever you wish. We're going across it.
You got a long run there. Let's
yes.
see how well he does the 20-metre sprint.
If you had planned on asking a question, we would have preferred you to be seated over there. No, fine. Could you pass that down, please?
Hi, Peter. If you have to choose between 3 equally effectively run charities, one saves lives, one improves lives, and one saves the earth, how do you choose between them?
Yeah, that's really one of the tough questions. I think we can get good comparisons as to, say, if one is working for global poverty, against global poverty to save lives, for example, you can get good comparisons. If you're comparing donating to an organisation that saves lives with one that tries to prevent climate change, for instance, I guess, saving the earth, that could be a best current example of that. That's a much more difficult comparison. Comparing saving lives and improving the quality of lives is also very difficult, perhaps slightly easier than something that's more like reducing greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. I don't know that we have the means for doing that yet. There are people thinking about it, and it's good that people should be thinking about it. I think at this stage you could probably say, well, decide for yourself, whether what you think is more important of these. Do you think saving lives takes priority over improving the quality of life? Let's say restoring sight as one of the examples I've given. And what about climate change, which is really going to make a do huge damage again to people in extreme poverty. They're the ones least able to defend themselves against, say, changes in rainfall patterns. But then within those causes, you do have research and information that can help you choose the most effective organisations. And I think if people do that, that's going to be okay. Just one quick thing, if you want to look at sort of those who are trying to compare different causes, there's something which was related to GiveWell but is now spun off as a separate organisation called the Open Philanthropy Project. So if you Google Open Philanthropy Project, they've been, whereas GiveWell does sort of pretty much in-depth research on particular organisations, Open Philanthropy Project is started to do broader surveys of how effective can we be in areas like climate change? How effective can we be in areas like stopping factory farming, for example? There's a report prepared by Lewis Bollard, who's another Australian who's over there in this field, working on that issue. So have a look there and you'll get more of an answer than I could give you in a few minutes.
I wonder how the Shane Warne Foundation stacks up.
Hello, Peter. I'm glad that you actually started the movement of EA, and it's very nice to feel not lonely over here. Sometimes actually being an effective altruist actually can be very lonely experience to me, and I'm happy with that. And also want to probably pose a question or more a statement of a problem. When in your situation where you ask the question about would you save a child who's drowning at the expense of your shoes, some people might say no, or even they might say yes, but deep in the mind they actually might be really answering no. We might have to also address that part of the component of it, because we are trying to increase selflessness, and it's good rate right now, but it also has to probably decrease the selfishness in the world as well. I don't know the answer to it right now, so that's something that...
Sure. I think, firstly, in terms of not being lonely, I should say I think one factor that's really helped the rise of this movement is the internet, because it's meant people who are living in different places who, I've had lots of people emailing me and say, until I read your article or your book, I never knew there was anyone else who thought like me. Because they were living somewhere where they hadn't met those other people. And I think there are a lot of people who are like that, and the internet can help us connect. Now, the stuff about selflessness, I wouldn't quite put it that way, because I think if you put it that way, then a lot of people will think, well, it's not human nature to be selfless. I know I'm not selfless. That's for saints, and I'm not one of them. I tend to say, I think, and I certainly feel this personally, and I've talked to a lot of other people, in fact, both in the effective altruism movement and previously in the animal movement, who feel this, that in fact, it is its own reward. It's not that you're really making a huge sacrifice. It's not that your life on the whole is worse. Your life is different. Maybe you have less cash to spend on luxuries and things that you might have bought, consumer goods. But you have a more fulfilling and more meaningful life. Again, Thomas said it when he said, he'd decided that he didn't want to go the conventional route in terms of earning as much money as he could, but he wanted to make his life meaningful. I think that's something that more and more people are thinking about. Again, perhaps that's a generational thing that is helping the movement. And I think we ought to stress that, because there's plenty of good psychological research that shows that people who are generous, that people who think of others, actually are more satisfied with their life, are happier. So that's the line I stress.
They're also sometimes better cricketers, aren't they?
Sometimes. Professor Singer, I was just wondering about your feelings about the relationship between utilitarianism and telling the truth as you feel that it is. For example, if you felt like you could extract more donations from this room by maybe exaggerating the effects of people's giving or something along those lines, or warning us that bad karma would get us, or that there was a God watching who might punish us if we didn't, then you might feel like you could therefore maximise your impact by essentially lying to us. So do you see truth, or your version of the truth, as something that fits within a utilitarian framework and sort of conveniently maximises impact because telling the truth creates good habits in society? Or do you feel like truth sort of has a separate place of value outside of utilitarianism, or that sits alongside it somehow?
Okay, my answer is the first of those options. I think the truth does actually coincide with maximising utility. you might be right that if I told some clever lie, I could raise more money tonight in this room, but lies, no matter how clever, tend to get exposed in the long run, and I think then you lose your credibility, and I think credibility for anybody, particularly for anybody who's a public figure, but also in your personal life and your friends as well, is really critically important. It's critically important to how effective you can be. So I think, that telling the truth is something that is really important, and we should be careful in this movement to get our facts right, not to exaggerate, not to distort, and to be honest when we address criticisms and problems that we have if those criticisms are raised. Thanks for the question.
Ryan, I'm just curious, is that your version of locker room talk? Because I don't know how you're going to get along with the rest of the team if you keep asking questions like this as you're padding up. Final question, folks.
It's not actually a question, and it's not something new, I'm assuming. I just want to thank you, Professor, because after listening to your speeches and reading your books, I've become a vegetarian, and I think I'm certainly a better person now, and I want to thank you in person. I really appreciate the awakening that has happened to me through your beliefs.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for saying that, and you've already heard tonight, I know, that through that you're not only reducing animal suffering, but you're also reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the negative environmental impact on the planet, and you're contributing to making the world a better place. So I do appreciate that decision, and I hope you're enjoying your diet too. I certainly am.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Peter Singer. Those sort of compliments can be quite intimidating or challenging or hard to deal with, and you took that very graciously. This is totally aside. I saw Jerry Lewis. I took my dad to see Jerry Lewis live, and the first question from the floor at the end of his show was, "Jerry, I had cancer. I was diagnosed. There was no chance. I watched all your movies, and you cured me of cancer." To which he said, "Next." I'm not making it up. That's how he treated it. So I thought you were a little more gracious than Jerry Lewis. He's an angry, angry man. Anyway, true story for the live streamers at home. So, folks, that brings us to the conclusion of our formalities and our presentations. I would like to thank, as I'm sure would you, all the people who appeared via video, of course, or, heaven forbid, here live in person. Join me in thanking Ryan, Kirsten, Pete, Fiona, Thomas, and Peter. Thank you so much for all your contributions. Thank you for being here. And seriously, thank you to all our supporters and sponsors who are getting on board, from Uber Eats to the Hilton. By the way, it's just been revealed to me before how we got this room for nothing. We didn't tell them we're coming, so keep it down, please. It's just their response to start giving people food and drink. Nice look. And don't forget, we really do have those giveaways to those sessions. What are they called, Alistair? The float chamber sessions, my gosh, where you can perceive of a brighter, warmer, more caring future. It's been a pleasure. My name is Brett DeHood. Now, just before we go, Daniel de Hoppen wants to take the stage and to probably say a few thanks. He's one of the people who put this whole shindig together. Please welcome Daniel.
Thanks so much, Brett. And we do have some delicious food and drinks outside, so you won't get any theatrics from me. I just want to take 30 seconds. Please could Alistair, Jesse, and Vivian stand up. This has been a very tumultuous launch event in many ways to organise it. And Sam, please Sam, I'm sorry. And one moment to me sticks out. Jesse and I were Skyping on Christmas Day because that's what we do on Christmas Day. And we didn't have a venue, we had 2 speakers, and we wrote up a list of venues where we could possibly hold this event. And we said, what will we do? It's on February 10th as it was at that stage, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. And I look out at this room today with so many people gathered, so many people watching on the stream, with Peter Singer here joining us. And I think, thank you so much all for coming, and thank you for these wonderful people for helping to organise the event. So, and with that, I bid you good night, farewell, and please enjoy the food and drinks outside. Thank you so much.